consulting, especially and in business, we're always hearing you've got to be customer centric, got to be customer centric. But really, what in the world does that mean?
What we call big word we use is persona, right? Understanding your target persona. Like if you had an ideal profile of someone who you were wanting to serve, and it's usually, you can go so far as to pick maybe an age bracket. Well, and the research says by being very targeted, you actually do a better job of meeting the needs of a broader set of people too. Mm-hmm. There was a client I worked with a while back in primary care who had actually gone so far as to give the patient persona they were targeting a name. I don't remember the name off the top of my head. It might have been Sally or Jane or something like that, but Sarah, actually I think it was Sarah. And they went so far as to give Sarah an entire life, right? Sarah was, I'm making this up a little bit, but Sarah was 33 years old. She lived in this suburb of the city they were in. I think it was Portland. She had 2 kids. She was married. This was her job. They went really far down this path of her persona, right? Because the idea was everything they did, they had to make sure Sarah wanted it. And if Sarah they wanted it, they wouldn't do it. Mm-hmm. And that was everything they did. And they were very successful because they were very targeted about the persona they were serving. And that persona then drove every conversation internally, every decision, every plan.
And what happens with leaders is if we don't have that specific avatar or persona that we are talking to, what happens is we are not as focused in our message.
Right.
So, for example, just like this podcast, I say, our clientele or our persona is a male between the ages of 35 and 50. Mm-hmm. Now, my other company I lead is a home health care store, oxygen, hospital beds, you name it. My ideal persona is a woman ages 50 to 65.
So, for example, we can take this one I mentioned earlier, the one that had the persona, right? Mm-hmm. So the culture was built around talking about that persona in all their meetings. Right, because they had this very detailed understanding of their Sarah, and so they would talk about her in every single meeting, right? Again, this is a made-up person. This isn't a real person. The other thing you can do is ask questions. I think I was actually in another organization where in every meeting room, and this was a little bit cheesy, by the way, so it's like works for a time, but it's to set a culture, not necessarily. But they actually would take T-shirts that said customer on them, and they put them over one of the chairs in every meeting room, and they said that's where the customer sits. There was no customer, right? So either everyone knew the customer was quote unquote in the room and it was an empty chair, or if someone felt compelled that they had the customer's view that they wanted to speak from, they could go sit in that chair and speak from the customer's viewpoint.
That's absolutely
so. There's a bunch of ways you can add
the
customer to the meetings. You add the customers to the agenda. You add the customers to the thought process. You add the customers. So you infuse that whatever your persona is into the operations and the heartbeat of your business.